Cassandra Mitchell, 22, sat alone in her graduation gown, scanning the sea of proud families filling the university auditorium. Not a single familiar face looked back at her. Her parents had promised they'd be there, both of them, together, for once. But as the last graduate crossed the stage and the ceremony ended, the truth became undeniable. They had forgotten her. Again. What Cassandra didn't know was that this abandonment would lead to a discovery that would shatter her entire understanding of family loyalty forever. Hey there, family drama lovers. Before I dive deeper into how my family completely abandoned me on what should have been one of the proudest days of my life, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If this story of family betrayal already has you hooked, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life drama that proves blood isn't always thicker than water. Trust me, what happens next in this story will make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. The empty seats at my graduation were merely the final blow in a long history of parental neglect. Growing up in suburban Boston, I had become accustomed to my parents' absence at important moments in my life. My mother, Elizabeth, a high-powered corporate attorney, and my father, James, a surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital, had always prioritized their careers over family life. Their professional achievements were impressive, but their parental track record was abysmal. I remember waiting alone after my middle school orchestra concert, violin case clutched tightly in my small hands as other kids were embraced by their proud parents. My mother had texted last minute about an emergency client meeting. My father never even responded to my reminder. The school janitor eventually called my neighbor to pick me up. For my 16th birthday, they had promised a special family dinner. I spent hours getting ready, applying makeup carefully, choosing my favorite dress. At 9 p.m., after waiting for 3 hours at the restaurant alone, I paid for my single slice of cake with my babysitting money and took an Uber home. They were both caught up at work. The next morning, a designer handbag appeared on my bed with a hastily scribbled note, "Happy birthday, princess. Sorry about dinner. Next time." Mom and Dad. High school graduation was similar, they showed up, but my mother spent the entire ceremony on her phone, and my father left immediately after my name was called to handle a critical patient. I had foolishly believed college would be different. During my 4 years at Boston University, I had worked tirelessly, double majoring in psychology and education, maintaining a 3.9 GPA, securing a prestigious teaching internship, and even giving the undergraduate research presentation at the department's annual symposium. None of which my parents attended. When my college graduation approached, I made sure to give them ample notice. 3 months in advance, I texted, called, and emailed them the details. 2 months before, I confirmed they had it in their calendars. 1 month prior, I reminded them again. 2 weeks before, I called their assistants personally to block out the time. The day before, I sent a final confirmation text to which they both replied, "Of course we'll be there, honey. Wouldn't miss it for the world." Yet there I sat in my cap and gown, completely alone, clutching my diploma with no one to celebrate my achievement. No parents beaming with pride. No flowers. No congratulatory dinner. Not even a text message explaining their absence. That evening, I returned to my empty apartment and stared at my phone, waiting for some explanation or apology. Nothing came. I called their cell phones repeatedly, straight to voicemail. I even called their offices, only to be told they were unavailable. As midnight approached, I made a decision that would ultimately change the course of my life. I was done being forgotten. I was done making excuses for them. I was done with the disappointment. I opened my laptop and booked a one-way flight to Seattle. A college friend had mentioned her tech company was hiring entry-level positions in their education department. I had nothing tying me to Boston except painful memories and absent parents. I had some savings, my degree, and most importantly, a newfound determination to build a life where I mattered. As I packed my belongings into 2 suitcases, I drafted but never sent a text message. Thank you for showing me exactly where I stand in your lives. Don't worry about explaining why you missed my graduation. I won't be around to hear it anyway. Instead, I simply turned off my phone, set it on the kitchen counter of my apartment, and walked out the door. What I didn't know then was that my parents' absence at my graduation wasn't just another disappointment in a long line of neglect. It was the first domino in a series of revelations that would expose a family secret so devastating that it would explain a lifetime of emotional distance, and ultimately lead to the most satisfying revenge I never planned. Seattle greeted me with its characteristic drizzle as I stepped off the plane. The gray skies matched my mood, but there was something freeing about being in a city where no one knew me, where I could reinvent myself without the shadow of being the forgotten daughter. My friend Alyssa met me at the airport, her bright smile a stark contrast to the weather. "Cassie, you actually did it," she exclaimed, pulling me into a tight hug. "I still can't believe they missed your graduation. That's a whole new level of neglect, even for your parents." "I'm trying not to think about it," I replied, blinking back tears. "I'm just grateful you're letting me crash until I figure things out." "Stay as long as you need," Alyssa said, grabbing one of my suitcases. "Besides, I already put in a good word for you at EDU Tech. They are actually excited to interview you tomorrow." The next few weeks passed in a blur. I landed the job at EDU Tech, developing educational software for elementary schools. I found a small, but charming studio apartment in Capitol Hill. I started making friends with my co-workers. On the surface, I was building a new life. Underneath, I was still nursing the wound of my family's ultimate betrayal. A month after moving to Seattle, I finally turned my phone back on. The screen lit up with notification after notification, 37 missed calls, 22 voicemails, and 63 text messages, all from my parents. I scrolled through the texts, which evolved from casual, "How was graduation?" to increasingly panicked, "Where are you?" messages as days passed with no response from me. The voicemails told a similar story. The first few were casual check-ins, then apologies about missing graduation due to an unavoidable work emergency, then frantic concern about my whereabouts. The final voicemail, left 3 weeks after I'd disappeared, was my mother sobbing, saying they'd filed a missing person report with the Boston police. Part of me felt vindicated. They finally noticed I was gone. Another part felt guilty for causing them worry. But mostly, I felt numb. Where was this concern when I was sitting alone at my graduation? Where was this attention when I was growing up? I sent a brief text, "I'm fine. I've moved away. I need space. Please don't contact me for a while." Within seconds, my phone rang, my mother. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. And again. Finally, I turned the phone off. That evening, I created a new email address and sent them a longer message. "I've taken a job across the country. I'm safe and building a life where I'm valued. Your absence at my graduation was the final straw in a lifetime of being forgotten and deprioritized. I need time and space away from you both. Please respect this boundary." Their responses came quickly: apologies, explanations, promises to do better, please to tell them where I was. I ignored them all. For the first time in my life, I was putting myself first. Months passed. I threw myself into my work, excelling at EDU Tech. My boss, Martin, took me under his wing, mentoring me and giving me increasing responsibility. By the 6-month mark, I was leading my own small team, developing a reading program for dyslexic students. "You're a natural at this, Cassandra," Martin said after I presented the prototype to the executive team. "It's like you were born to design educational tools." His comment triggered something in me. Born to do this. Born? My birthday. That night, I pulled out my birth certificate from my documents folder. I had needed it for employment paperwork and hadn't really looked at it closely before. Now, I studied it, my eyes lingering on my parents' information, my time of birth, the hospital name. Something felt off. I couldn't place it exactly, but a nagging feeling persisted. I opened my laptop and searched for the hospital listed on my birth certificate, Boston Memorial. To my surprise, search results indicated that Boston Memorial Hospital had closed down 3 years before my birth date. That couldn't be right. I dug deeper, searching through archived newspaper articles about the hospital closure. It was confirmed, Boston Memorial had indeed shut down operations well before I was supposedly born there. My heart pounding, I examined the birth certificate again. It looked official, with all the proper seals and signatures. But if I wasn't born at Boston Memorial, where was I born? And why would my birth certificate list a non-existent hospital? That night, sleep eluded me as questions multiplied in my mind. Had there been a clerical error? Was it a simple mistake? Or was there something more sinister behind this discrepancy? The next day, I called the Massachusetts Vital Records office, claiming I needed a replacement birth certificate because mine had been damaged. The clerk asked for my information, then paused. "I'm showing that your birth certificate was amended when you were 2 years old," she said. "The original was replaced with a new one." Amended? Why would it be amended? I asked, my voice shaking. "I don't have that information." "You would need to submit a formal request for the original record, which requires a court order since it was sealed." A sealed original birth certificate. An amended replacement showing a hospital that didn't exist. Parents who had always kept me at emotional arm's length. The pieces were beginning to form a disturbing pattern, one that suggested my entire life might have been built on a foundation of lies. I hung up the phone, my mind racing with possibilities. Was I adopted? Was there some medical condition they'd hidden from me? Or was there something even darker lurking in my family history? Whatever the truth was, I was determined to uncover it. My parents had forgotten me my entire life. Now, I would discover why, and in the process, I would learn that some family secrets, once revealed, can never be forgotten. The discovery of my amended birth certificate launched me into an investigation that consumed my evenings and weekends. By day, I was Cassandra Mitchell, rising star at EduTech. By night, I was a detective, piecing together the mystery of my own existence. I started methodically, creating a timeline of my early life based on family photos, stories I'd been told, and my own earliest memories. The oldest photo of me with my parents showed me at approximately 2 years old, coinciding with when my birth certificate had been amended. There were no baby photos, no first birthday celebrations documented, nothing from my earliest months. When I mentioned this to Alyssa over coffee, she suggested the obvious, maybe you're adopted. That would explain the amended birth certificate and the lack of baby pictures. I've considered that, I admitted. But why keep it a secret? Plenty of families adopt children and are open about it. And if I am adopted, why choose a non-existent hospital for my fake birth certificate? Why not just list the adoption agency? I decided to approach the investigation from multiple angles. First, I submitted a formal request for my original birth certificate, knowing it would likely be denied without a court order, but wanting to start the paper trail. Second, I ordered a DNA test kit, curious to see if my genetic background matched what I knew of my family's ancestry. Third, I began researching my parents' whereabouts and activities around the time of my birth. The DNA test results came back first. According to the analysis, I was primarily of Northern European descent, with significant Scandinavian markers. This matched what I knew of my father's Norwegian heritage, but revealed nothing particularly surprising. What was interesting, however, was when I opted into the family matching feature. The system identified several second and third cousins I had never heard of, primarily in Minnesota and Wisconsin. The closest genetic match was someone named Elaine Sorensen, listed as a likely first cousin once removed. The name meant nothing to me. I sent Elaine a message through the platform, introducing myself and expressing curiosity about our family connection. While waiting for her response, I continued my research into my parents' past. Social media hadn't existed when I was born, making the digital trail sparse. However, the Boston Globe's online archives provided an unexpected lead. I found a small article from January 1999, 2 months before my birth, mentioning my father receiving a prestigious medical award. The article noted he had recently returned from an extended research sabbatical in Minnesota. Minnesota, where many of my newly discovered DNA relatives lived. I dug deeper into my father's professional history, requesting his CV from Massachusetts General Hospital's Public Relations Office under the pretense of being a medical student writing a paper on distinguished surgeons. His curriculum vitae confirmed a 6-month sabbatical at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, from September 1998 to February 1999. My mother was more difficult to track. As a private practice attorney, her professional movements weren't as well documented. However, I found mentions of her in legal journals taking on a reduced caseload during the same period, citing family matters as the reason. Both my parents had been in Minnesota, away from their regular lives in Boston, around the time I was born. And now I had DNA matches to unknown relatives in the same state. 3 weeks after sending my message, Elaine Sorensen finally responded, "Cassandra, I'm surprised to hear from you. How is your father James? We lost touch many years ago, after everything that happened with my cousin Catherine. I'd love to catch up." Catherine. A name I had never heard before, yet apparently someone connected to both Elaine and my father. I responded immediately, "Thank you for getting back to me, Elaine. I'm actually trying to piece together some family history. Could you tell me more about Catherine and her connection to my father?" Elaine's next response changed everything. "Oh dear, I assumed you knew. Catherine was your father's first wife. They were married for nearly 5 years before he met your mother. Catherine was my cousin. She died in childbirth in early 1999. It was such a tragedy, losing both her and the baby girl. Your father was devastated. He moved back to Boston shortly after. I'm surprised he never mentioned her to you." I stared at the message, my hands shaking. My father had been previously married. His first wife had died in childbirth in early 1999, around the time I was supposedly born. And the baby had died too. Or had she? The pieces were starting to align in a disturbing pattern. The amended birth certificate. The non-existent hospital. The lack of baby photos. My parents' mysterious time in Minnesota. The emotional distance they had always maintained. What if I wasn't their biological daughter at all? What if I was someone else entirely? I sent another message to Elaine. "This may sound strange, but do you have any photos of Catherine? And do you know where she is buried? I'm trying to understand more about my family history." Elaine replied with an old scanned photo attached. It showed a young woman with auburn hair and a bright smile, standing beside a younger version of my father. "This is from their wedding day," Elaine wrote. "Catherine is buried at Lakewood Cemetery in Minneapolis. Her headstone reads Catherine and Sorensen Mitchell, 1972 to 1999, beloved wife and mother. The baby was buried with her, though they hadn't decided on a name yet. A headstone that acknowledged a baby who supposedly died. A birth certificate amended when I was 2. A hospital that didn't exist. I booked a flight to Minneapolis for the following weekend. I needed to see Catherine's grave for myself. I needed to know if the baby girl who died in 1999 was memorialized there, or if her identity had been stolen and given to me. As my investigation deepened, I had no idea that my search for truth would not only reveal my parents' darkest secret, but would also lead to an accidental revenge more complete than anything I could have planned. Minneapolis greeted me with unseasonably warm weather for April, as if trying to soften the blow of what I was about to discover. I checked into a modest hotel near Lakewood Cemetery, my stomach in knots. Part of me wanted to call the whole thing off, to return to Seattle and my new life, to forget the questions that had consumed me for weeks. But I knew there was no going back. Some truths, once glimpsed, demand to be fully seen. The cemetery was beautiful, a historic garden cemetery with rolling hills, mature trees, and a peaceful lake at its center. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated its serene beauty. Instead, I clutched the cemetery map in my sweating palm, following the winding paths to Section 24, where Elaine had told me I would find Catherine's grave. It took nearly 20 minutes of searching among the headstones before I found it, a simple granite marker with elegant lettering. Catherine and Sorensen Mitchell. 1972 to 1999. Beloved wife and mother. Forever in our hearts. I stood there, staring at the inscription. Mother. This woman had been considered a mother, if only for a brief moment. But where was the mention of her baby? There was no second name, no indication that an infant was buried alongside her. I knelt down, running my fingers over the engraved letters, when a voice behind me made me jump. Are you family? I turned to see an elderly groundskeeper watching me with kind eyes. I'm not sure anymore, I answered honestly. He nodded as if this were a perfectly reasonable response. You look like her, you know. Something about the eyes. My heart stuttered. Did you know her? Catherine? Not personally, he said. But I've been working here for 30 years. You remember certain graves, especially the sad ones. Young woman dying in childbirth, that's not something you forget, even in this business. I took a deep breath. What about the baby? I was told the baby died too. The groundskeeper frowned, scratching his head. That's the thing that always struck me as odd. There was a funeral for the mother, but I never saw a burial for any infant. And I would have known. I handle all the grave preparations in this section. My legs felt suddenly weak. I sat down heavily on the ground beside Catherine's headstone. Are you all right, miss? The groundskeeper asked, concerned. When did Catherine die exactly? I asked, ignoring his question. Late February or early March 1999, if I recall correctly. Right around when the big snowstorm hit. March 1999. The same month listed on my birth certificate. I thanked the groundskeeper and promised I was fine, just emotional about visiting a relative's grave. Once he left, I sat beside Catherine's headstone for a long time, trying to process what I was learning. No baby buried here, despite what Elaine had been told. A death that coincided precisely with my supposed birth. After leaving the cemetery, I went straight to the Minneapolis Public Library to search through newspaper archives. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for, a small obituary for Catherine Mitchell, age 27, who passed away during childbirth on March 3, 1999. The notice mentioned she was survived by her husband, Dr. James Mitchell, but made no mention of a baby, either surviving or deceased. Next, I visited the county records office, requesting any birth or death certificates filed for a baby Mitchell in March 1999. The clerk found nothing. According to official records, Catherine Mitchell had died during childbirth, but no baby, either living or stillborn, had been registered. That evening, back in my hotel room, I received an email notification that my request for my original birth certificate had been formally denied, as expected. However, the rejection letter included a crucial piece of information. The original document was sealed by court order on May 15, 2001, as part of adoption proceedings in Suffolk County, Massachusetts. Adoption proceedings. More than 2 years after my supposed birth. The timeline was becoming clearer, and with it, a horrifying theory was taking shape. I couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, I took a cab to the hospital where Catherine had died. After some persuasion and a fabricated story about researching my family medical history, a sympathetic nurse in records agreed to check if there was any information about a baby born to Catherine Mitchell on March 3, 1999. She returned looking troubled. "This is unusual," she said quietly. "I found Catherine Mitchell's record. She did die during childbirth, but the baby's outcome is marked as transferred rather than deceased or discharged. There's no death certificate for any infant, and no further information about where the baby was transferred to." Transferred. Not deceased. "One more thing," I said, my voice barely audible. "Can you tell me if my father, if Dr. James Mitchell, was present during the birth?" The nurse checked the record again. "Yes, he's listed as present. Along with another doctor, a Dr. Elizabeth Brennan." Elizabeth Brennan. My mother's maiden name. I left the hospital in a daze, the pieces finally clicking into place. Catherine Mitchell had died giving birth to a baby girl on March 3, 1999. That baby, marked as transferred, not deceased, had disappeared from official records. My birth certificate had been amended when I was 2, and formally sealed when I was allegedly adopted at age 2. The conclusion was inescapable: I was Catherine Mitchell's daughter. Somehow, after her death, my father and Elizabeth, not yet my mother, had taken me. They had created a false birth certificate showing I was born in a non-existent hospital to Elizabeth rather than Catherine. 2 years later, they had formalized this deception through a closed adoption. I had been stolen, not forgotten. My entire identity had been built on a monstrous lie. That night, sitting in my hotel room, I finally did something I'd avoided for months. I called my mother, or rather, the woman who had claimed to be my mother my entire life. "Hey everyone, I know this story is getting intense, and I can see why you're all on the edge of your seats in the comments. Before I continue with what happened when I finally confronted the woman who had pretended to be my mother all these years, take a moment to hit that like button if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted. Subscribe if you want to see how this family drama unfolds. Trust me, the karma that's coming in the next parts is something you won't want to miss. I'm still processing everything that happened next, but your support means the world to me as I share the most painful chapter of my life with you." The phone rang 4 times before she answered, her voice a mixture of surprise and relief. "Cassandra. Oh my God, is that really you?" "It's me," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Where are you? Are you okay? We've been so worried. Your father and I." "I'm in Minneapolis," I interrupted. "I just visited Catherine Mitchell's grave." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear her breathing change, becoming shallow and rapid. "Who?" she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Catherine Mitchell. Dad's first wife. The woman who died giving birth to me." Another long silence. Then, "Cassie, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but you're confused. I gave birth to you at Boston. At Boston Memorial Hospital. A hospital that closed 3 years before I was supposedly born there." "Try again, Elizabeth." Using her first name felt strange in my mouth, but she had never really been my mother, had she? "You need to come home," she said, her lawyer voice emerging now, controlled and authoritative. We can discuss this as a family. Whatever you think you know. I know that Catherine Mitchell died during childbirth on March 3, 1999. I know her baby was marked as transferred, not deceased. I know that you, an attorney, and Dad were both present for the birth. I know my original birth certificate was sealed when I was supposedly adopted at age 2. What I don't know is why. Why did you steal me and pretend I was your biological child? It wasn't like that, she whispered, the facade cracking. You don't understand what happened. Then explain it to me. Now? She took a deep breath. Your father loved Catherine very much. They had been trying for years to have a baby. When she finally got pregnant, it was like a miracle. Then everything went wrong during the delivery. There was severe hemorrhaging. The doctors couldn't save her. And the baby? Me? You were perfectly healthy. But James, he broke down. He couldn't handle losing Catherine. I was there as his friend and attorney, helping with the medical decisions. When it became clear Catherine wouldn't survive, she made me promise to look after both of you. So you decided that meant pretending I was your biological child. Creating fake documentation. Lying to me my entire life. James couldn't bear to look at you at first. You reminded him too much of Catherine, brought back too much pain. I took you back to Boston to give him space to grieve. The plan was always for him to come get you when he was ready. But that's not what happened. No, she admitted. After a few months, he came to Boston, still devastated. We had become close during the tragedy. He proposed a solution that would let him be in your life without the constant reminder of Catherine. We would get married, raise you together, give you a stable home with 2 parents. By erasing my mother. By pretending I was born to you. It seemed like the kindest option at the time. You were so young. And technically, the paperwork wasn't completed until the adoption 2 years later. Adoption? I scoffed. My own father adopted me. After spending 2 years pretending I wasn't his biological child. The legal situation was complicated. Catherine's family wanted custody. They threatened to expose what we had done. The adoption was our lawyer's solution to solidify our claim. I felt sick. Catherine's family, my family, they knew about me. They wanted me. They knew you had survived, yes. But James was your father. We believed we were doing what was best for everyone. Best for everyone. Or best for you and Dad. You got the husband, the baby, the perfect little family, all because another woman died. That's not fair, Cassandra. I loved you from the moment I first held you. I've been your mother in every way that matters. Except you haven't, I said, my voice breaking. You and Dad both kept me at arm's length my entire life. You missed recitals and birthdays and graduations. Was it because I reminded you of your lies? Or because deep down, you never really wanted me in the first place? I was just the price you paid to get Dad. That's not true, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. We love you. We've always loved you. If you loved me, you would have told me the truth. You would have let me know about Catherine. You would have let me have a relationship with her family, my family. Instead, you stole my identity, my history, my entire life. We were trying to protect you. No, you were protecting yourselves. And now I understand why you were never really there for me. Every time you looked at me, you saw your lies. You saw Catherine. She was crying now, soft sobs coming through the phone. Please, Cassie. Come home. Let us explain properly. Your father should be part of this conversation. My father, I said coldly, has had 22 years to be part of the conversation. He chose not to be. Just like both of you chose not to come to my graduation. About the graduation, she said, sniffling. There really was an emergency. One of my biggest clients was being indicted. And your father had a complicated surgery. Save it, I cut her off. It doesn't matter anymore. Nothing you could say would excuse a lifetime of emotional neglect. And now that I know the truth, it all makes perfect sense. You couldn't bear to celebrate my achievements, because they reminded you that I should have been celebrating with my real mother. I am your real mother, she insisted. Biology isn't everything, Cassandra. I raised you. Raising involves being present, Elizabeth. You and Dad outsourced that to nannies and housekeepers. You were ghosts in my childhood. And now I know why. There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice had a different quality. Less defensive, more resigned. What are you going to do now? She asked quietly. It was a good question. What was I going to do with this devastating truth? I am going to meet Catherine's family, I decided in that moment. My family. Elaine mentioned other relatives. I am going to find them and learn about the mother you stole from me. Cassandra, please think carefully. This could have serious legal implications for all of us. Of course she would think of the legal ramifications. Always the attorney. Are you threatening me? I asked. No. I'm asking you to consider the consequences. If this becomes public, you and Dad could face charges for what you did. Is that what you're worried about? Your reputations? Your careers? I'm worried about our family being destroyed. Our family was built on lies. It was destroyed the moment you decided to steal me and erase my mother. Another long silence. Will you at least talk to your father before you do anything? She finally asked. Put him on the phone. He's not here. He's at a medical conference in Chicago. Of course he is, I said bitterly. Tell him I know everything. Tell him I'm going to meet Catherine's family, my real family. And tell him not to try to stop me. Cassandra, please. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt strangely calm. The truth was finally out. The mystery of my parents' emotional distance had been solved. I hadn't been forgotten, I had been stolen. And the people who had taken me had been living with the guilt of their actions my entire life. No wonder they couldn't bear to look me in the eye. No wonder they had missed every important moment. No wonder they had been shadows rather than parents. I scrolled through my phone to Elaine Sorensen's contact information. It was time to meet the family that had been kept from me for 22 years. It was time to learn about the mother whose existence had been erased. As I pressed call, I had no idea that this conversation would set in motion a series of events that would bring the ultimate justice, not through courts or confrontations, but through the simple, devastating power of truth. Elaine Sorensen lived in a charming craftsman-style home in a quiet Minneapolis suburb. As I stood on her porch the next day, my finger hovering over the doorbell, I fought the urge to run. What if Catherine's family rejected me? What if they blamed me for her death? What if this was all a horrible mistake? Before I could retreat, the door swung open, revealing a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and auburn hair streaked with silver, the same shade of auburn I had seen in Catherine's wedding photo, the same shade as my own. Cassandra, she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Oh my goodness, you look just like her. Without warning, she pulled me into a tight embrace. I stiffened at first, unused to such spontaneous affection, then slowly relaxed into her arms. Come in, Elaine said, wiping tears from her eyes as she released me. Everyone's so excited to meet you. We never thought this day would come. Everyone? I asked, stepping into the warm living room. The family. When you called and told me what you'd discovered, I contacted Catherine's parents, your grandparents. They are on their way from Rochester. And her sister Julie lives just a few blocks away. She'll be here any minute with her husband and kids. My grandparents. My aunt. Cousins. A whole family I never knew existed. I don't know what to say, I stammered. This is overwhelming. Elaine squeezed my hand. I can only imagine. Would you like some tea while we wait for the others? We have so much to talk about. Over tea at her kitchen table, Elaine filled in the gaps of my mother's life, and by extension, the beginning of my own. Catherine had been brilliant and kind, a pediatric nurse with a passion for helping children. She and my father had met during her rotation at Massachusetts General, fallen in love, and married after a whirlwind romance. They were so happy, Elaine said, showing me more photos. When they announced she was pregnant after years of trying, the whole family celebrated. Your grandfather even built a cradle by hand. I ran my fingers over a photo of Catherine, hugely pregnant, beaming as she stood next to a wooden cradle. A cradle meant for me. What happened? I asked. With the birth. Elaine's expression darkened. It was sudden. Placental abruption, they told us. By the time they got her to the hospital, she was already in critical condition. Your father was there, he called us from the hospital to tell us Catherine was gone. She paused, her voice catching. He told us the baby, you, had died too. He lied, I whispered. Yes. We were devastated. Didn't even question it at the time, why would we? Your grandfather and grandmother wanted to see you, to hold their granddaughter one last time, but James said the hospital had already taken your body for research purposes with his consent. It seemed strange, but he was a doctor, and we trusted him. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Moments later, the house was filled with people, my people. Catherine's parents, Harold and Margaret Sorensen, both in their 70s, but still vibrant, my Aunt Julie with her husband Robert, and their teenage twins, Catherine's younger brother Michael, and his wife Sarah. They surrounded me, tears flowing freely as they touched my hair, my face, marveling at the resemblance to Catherine. I sat in the center of their attention, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love from strangers, who were also my closest blood relatives. We've missed 22 years, my grandmother Margaret said, holding my hand tightly. But we have you now. That's what matters. Over the next few hours, I learned more about my mother and the family I'd been denied. They showed me albums full of photos of Catherine growing up, told me stories about her childhood pranks, her academic achievements, her kindness to others. I learned that she had loved sunflowers, classical music, and spicy food, just like me. I discovered that my artistic abilities likely came from her, as she had been an accomplished painter. She would have been such a wonderful mother, my grandfather said, his voice breaking. She had so much love to give. As the evening progressed, the initial shock and emotion gave way to more practical discussions. My Aunt Julie, an attorney like Elizabeth, but with a warmth Elizabeth had never shown, addressed the elephant in the room. What James and Elizabeth did was criminal, she said firmly. Identity fraud, falsification of documents, potentially kidnapping. We could pursue legal action. I hesitated. I don't know if that's what I want. I'm still processing everything. Of course, Julie nodded. But you should know your options. More importantly, you should know that we fought for you back then. You did? I asked. My grandfather's face hardened. When James told us you had died, we were devastated. But things didn't add up. There was no death certificate we could find. No funeral for you. When we pressed for answers, James suddenly moved back to Boston. We hired a private investigator, who discovered James had married Elizabeth, and they had a baby girl, you. We tried to make contact, my grandmother added. We called, wrote letters, even flew to Boston once. But they threatened legal action if we didn't stay away. Said we were harassing them, that we were delusional with grief, imagining their daughter was our Catherine's baby. James was a respected doctor, my grandfather continued. Elizabeth was a well-connected attorney. We were just retired teachers from Minnesota. We didn't have the resources for prolonged legal battle, especially with no proof except our suspicions. We never stopped thinking about you, though, my Aunt Julie said softly. Every birthday, every Christmas, we would wonder where you were, how you were doing. Whether you were happy. I thought about my birthdays and Christmases, the designer gifts left on my bed with hasty notes, the parents who were always too busy to celebrate properly, the emotional void that had defined my childhood. I wasn't, I admitted. They were physically present sometimes, but emotionally, it was like living with strangers. Now I understand why. My family exchanged sad glances. What do you want to do now, Cassandra? Elaine asked gently. I looked around at these people, my mother's people, my people, who had welcomed me without hesitation, who had grieved for me for 22 years, who were offering me a place in their lives despite the time we had lost. I want to know my mother, I said. I want to be part of this family. I want to have the connections I've been missing my whole life. And James and Elizabeth, my grandfather asked, his voice carefully neutral despite the pain evident in his eyes. I don't know yet, I admitted. Part of me wants to confront them fully, to make them face what they did in front of everyone. Part of me just wants to move forward with my real family and leave them behind with their guilt. What I didn't say was that something was already happening, something I hadn't planned, but which felt like the perfect justice for what my father and Elizabeth had done. A karmic retribution that was unfolding naturally, without my having to lift a finger. The next day, I returned to Elaine's house to continue getting to know my family. My Aunt Julie arrived looking troubled. Cassandra, have you seen the news? I shook my head. Your father, James, has been placed on administrative leave at Massachusetts General. Apparently, a whistleblower at the hospital filed a complaint alleging ethical violations related to a birth case from 1999. What? How is that possible? I haven't said anything to anyone except you all and Elizabeth. It wasn't you, Julie said, showing me an article on her phone. It was Elizabeth. According to the article, Elizabeth Brennan Mitchell had voluntarily come forward to the hospital ethics board with information about potentially serious ethical violations committed by her husband 22 years earlier. She was cooperating fully with the investigation. My phone rang. It was Elizabeth. Did you do this? I asked when I answered. You deserved the truth, she said quietly. And so did Catherine's family. I've lived with this lie for 22 years, watching it destroy my marriage and hurt you. When you called from Minneapolis, something broke in me, Cassandra. I couldn't do it anymore. So you turned Dad in. Just like that. I gave a statement to the hospital ethics board. I've also contacted the Massachusetts Bar Association to self-report my own professional violations. And I've spoken to Catherine's parents. I was stunned. You talked to the Sorensens? Yes. I apologized for my role in keeping you from them. It doesn't change anything, I know. But carrying this secret, it's been destroying me from the inside for 22 years. Every time I looked at you and saw Catherine, the guilt would overwhelm me. Is that why you and Dad were never really there for me? Because I reminded you of what you'd done. There was a long pause. Yes, she finally admitted. James couldn't bear to look at you sometimes, you have her eyes, her smile. And I was living a lie, raising another woman's child as my own, knowing we had stolen you from a family who would have loved you as you deserved to be loved. For the first time, I felt a flicker of pity for Elizabeth. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition of the prison she had built for herself. What happens now? I asked. James will likely lose his medical license. I'll probably be disbarred. We'll both possibly face criminal charges. But none of that matters anymore. The truth needed to come out, for you, for Catherine's family, and for us. After we hung up, I sat with my newfound family, processing this unexpected development. My father and Elizabeth were facing the consequences of their actions, not because I had sought revenge, but because the weight of their deception had finally become too heavy to bear. The truth, hidden for so long, was working its own perfect justice. My mother's family was getting acknowledgement of the wrong done to them. I was reclaiming my true identity and finding the loving family I had always been denied. And the people who had stolen me were confronting the moral bankruptcy of their actions. As my grandmother wrapped her arm around my shoulders, I felt a sense of belonging I had never experienced before. Catherine would be so proud of the woman you've become, she whispered. For the first time, I felt the presence of my mother, not as an absence or a mystery, but as a part of me that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. In finding her, I had found myself. And in that discovery, the perfect justice had already been served. 1 year later, I stood in front of Catherine's grave, no longer a stranger to the woman buried there, but her daughter in every sense of the word. I placed a bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite, on the polished granite, and traced my fingers over the newly added inscription below her name. Mother of Cassandra Catherine Sorensen. Reunited in spirit, if not in life. So much had changed in 12 months. I had legally reclaimed my birth name, taking the Sorensen surname that should have been mine from the beginning. I had moved to Minnesota, accepting a job with an educational technology company in Minneapolis to be near my mother's family, my family. The legal consequences for my father and Elizabeth had played out largely as expected. My father had lost his medical license and was facing criminal charges for falsifying birth records and violating numerous medical ethics regulations. Elizabeth had been disbarred and had agreed to a plea deal that included probation and community service in exchange for her testimony. But the most profound changes had been internal. In embracing my true identity and connecting with the family that had been kept from me, I had found healing for the wound of abandonment that had defined my life. The Sorensens had welcomed me without reservation, folding me into their lives as if making up for lost time. My grandfather had given me the cradle he'd built for me before my birth, now restored and waiting in my apartment for a future I could finally envision, one with authentic connections and genuine love. My grandmother had shared my mother's journals, giving me insight into the woman whose absence had shaped my existence. My Aunt Julie had become a mentor and friend, helping me navigate both the legal aftermath and my emotional journey. As I stood at the grave, I heard footsteps approaching. I turned to see an elderly man with stooped shoulders and a hesitant gait. Cassandra, my father said, his voice thin and uncertain. I hadn't seen him since the truth had come out. He looked decades older than his 60 years, grief and guilt having exacted their price. "What are you doing here?" I asked, neither hostile nor welcoming. "I come every year on this day," he admitted. "It's the anniversary of when Catherine and I met." I hadn't known that. There was so much about my mother I was still learning. "The Sorensens told me I might find you here," he continued. "I wanted to see you before the trial starts next month." I nodded, unsure what to say to this man, who was both my biological father and the architect of my lifelong sense of not belonging. "I've been trying to understand why I did what I did," he said, his eyes fixed on Catherine's headstone. "At first, I told myself it was love, that I couldn't bear to lose both Catherine and you. But that's not the whole truth." "What is the truth, then?" I asked. "Fear," he said simply. "I was afraid of failing you, of being a single father, of facing Catherine's family with the child who lived while their daughter died. Elizabeth offered a solution that seemed easier. We could pretend nothing had happened. We could start over. Except you couldn't, I said. Not really. He nodded, looking at me fully for perhaps the first time in my life. Every time I looked at you, I saw Catherine. Your expressions, your mannerisms, they are all her. It was like living with a ghost. I convinced myself that emotional distance was better than falling apart in front of you. So you just forgot me instead. Missed recitals and birthdays and graduations. I never forgot you, Cassandra. I was just too much of a coward to face what I had done. The more you grew to resemble her, the harder it became. I studied this broken man, who had once been a respected surgeon, who had made a catastrophic moral error, and spent the next 2 decades living with its consequences. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said, as if reading my thoughts. What I did was unforgivable. I stole you from a family that would have loved you properly. I denied you your true identity and your heritage. I failed Catherine, and I failed you. Yes, I said simply. You did. I just wanted you to know that not a day goes by that I don't regret it. And I wanted to tell you that you made the right choice, finding your mother's family. They are good people. They'll give you what Elizabeth and I couldn't. And what's that? Acceptance, he said. Love without conditions or complications. The ability to look at you and see you for yourself, not as a reminder of loss or guilt. We stood in silence for a moment, the autumn breeze rustling the cemetery's maple trees, sending a shower of red and gold leaves dancing around us. Catherine would be proud of you, he said finally. You have her strength, her integrity. When you discovered the truth, you didn't seek revenge or destruction. You sought connection and understanding. That's all her. Something shifted inside me at his words, not forgiveness, exactly, but a release. The anger that had sustained me through the past year began to dissolve, replaced by something more complex. Compassion for this deeply flawed man, who had made a terrible choice in a moment of grief and spent a lifetime paying for it. I'm moving forward, I told him. With my real name, my real family, my real life. The life that should have been mine from the beginning. As you should, he nodded. I just have one request, if you're willing. What is it? Tell Catherine's parents, your grandparents, that I'm sorry. Not for my sake, but because they deserve to hear it, even if they can never accept it. I'll tell them, I promised. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn velvet box. This belonged to Catherine. Her engagement ring. She wanted you to have it someday. I should have given it to you years ago, but it would have meant telling the truth, I finished for him. Yes. He held out the box. It's yours now, as it always should have been. I took the box and opened it, revealing a delicate vintage ring with a small diamond surrounded by sapphires. It was beautiful in its simplicity, nothing like the ostentatious jewelry Elizabeth favored. Thank you, I said, slipping the ring onto my right hand. It fit perfectly, another small connection to the mother I had never known, but was coming to understand through stories, photos, and now, this tangible link to her life. As my father turned to leave, I called after him. I don't forgive you. I don't know if I ever will. He paused, then nodded. I understand. But I'm not angry anymore, I continued. Not for myself, anyway. I've found where I belong now. I'm angry for my mother, and for her family who lost 22 years with me. But for myself, I'm finally whole. He smiled sadly. That's more than I deserve. Goodbye, Cassandra. Goodbye, I said, watching him walk away, a solitary figure bent under the weight of consequences that had finally caught up with him. Later that evening, I sat in my grandparents' warm kitchen, surrounded by family for Sunday dinner, a weekly tradition I had quickly come to treasure. My grandfather carved the roast while my grandmother, and aunt debated the proper amount of garlic in the mashed potatoes. My cousins were setting the table, arguing good-naturedly about a video game. "I saw my father today," I said during a lull in the conversation. The room quieted immediately, all eyes turning to me. "At the cemetery," I explained. "He comes every year on the anniversary of when he and Mom met." My grandmother reached for my grandfather's hand, their eyes meeting in a silent exchange. "He asked me to tell you he's sorry," I continued. "Not for his sake, but because he thinks you deserve to hear it." My grandfather's jaw tightened. 22 years too late. "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to forgive him. I just promised I would deliver the message." My grandmother studied me for a long moment. "How do you feel about seeing him?" I considered the question carefully. "Sad, mostly. For everyone involved. For Mom, who never got to see me grow up. For you all, who lost those years with me. For him, who destroyed his life with one terrible decision. Even for Elizabeth, who lived with a lie until she couldn't anymore. And for yourself," my Aunt Julie asked gently. "I'm at peace," I realized as I said it. For the first time in my life, I know who I am and where I belong. The emptiness I felt my whole life is gone. My grandfather cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rough. "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become, Cassandra. She had the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. You have that same capacity for compassion, even toward those who hurt you." "I get that from her," I said, smiling through sudden tears. "And from all of you." My grandmother squeezed my hand. "Family isn't just about blood, dear. It's about who shows up, who stays, who loves you unconditionally. We may have lost those early years, but we are here now, and we are not going anywhere." As we joined hands around the table for grace, another family tradition I was embracing, I felt a profound sense of having come full circle. The journey that began with an empty auditorium at my graduation had led me to a full table surrounded by the family I was always meant to have. The truth had been painful, but it had also been liberating. In losing the false identity I had been given, I had found my authentic self. In confronting the betrayal at the heart of my existence, I had discovered the strength to forge a new path forward. And in connecting with my mother's legacy, I had finally found the belonging I had sought my entire life. As dinner progressed and stories flowed around me, I silently thanked my mother, not just for giving me life, but for giving me a family that had never stopped looking for me, that had welcomed me home with open arms when I finally found my way back to them. The empty seats at my graduation had led me to a table filled with love, proving that sometimes the most painful moments can lead to the most profound healing. I look at all of you who've followed this journey with me to its conclusion, and I'm overwhelmed by your support through this family saga. Has anyone else experienced a moment when family secrets changed everything you thought you knew about yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this tale of family betrayal and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories that explore the complicated nature of family bonds. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that sometimes, the hardest truths lead to the most healing outcomes. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, like Catherine's family ultimately did for me. You've all shown that sometimes the family we find can be just as important as the family we are born into. Until next time, remember that the truth, no matter how painful, always finds its way to the light.